Hello and welcome to a brand new series of Snooker Vodcasts in which we discuss everything in the game from the greatest ever player to the greatest match of all time. Today's show is all about snooker rivalry, and I'm joined by two fellas who are usually sat alongside me on the couch, but for obvious reasons they're not. But we can still say hello and welcome firstly to former world number 3 Neil Foulds. Fouldsy, good to see you.
Yes, hello mate, you all right?
Good, very well. Nice to see you've got the snooker memorabilia up on the wall behind you in shape of a dartboard.
Yeah, listen, my darts is improving all the time, you know. I'm not much of a player, but I think it's an easy game to play in these circumstances, isn't it? You know, if you're staying in.
It's the perfect game to play because you don't need a lot of room. Jimmy, lovely to see you. I'm guessing you've not got a snooker table in your house.
No, I might be getting one when this is all over. I can assure you, it's drove me nuts.
We get rid of the kitchen sink and put the table in there, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, listen, we've got loads to talk about in today's show. I'm very excited about talking about rivalries, Neil, because, of course, it's important in any sport. But how important do you think it is in the sport of snooker to get from where we were when snooker started out to where we are now?
Yeah, our rivalries are great. You know, great players playing each other. Sometimes it clashes in personality. And I think the second part, the personality clash, is why people were attracted to when, for instance, Steve Davis played Alex Higgins all those years ago. I know we're going to speak about that as a rivalry because someone wanted one, half the community wanted one player to win, and the other half absolutely wanted the other guy. And that's why we love the game. And there's nothing like great players locking horns, you know.
Yeah, Jimmy, we'll talk about your rivalry with Steve Davis a bit later on, but I want to get your view on your old pal, the late, great Alex Higgins, of course, who had a fantastic rivalry with Steve Davis and contrasting styles as well. Do you think that's what we look for in a rivalry? Two players that are completely different, yet still at the top of their game?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there was two different personalities, as Neil just said, but the main attraction, I think, was the two different styles of play. You know, Higgins had been around for a few years then, and then Steve Davis come along as a phenomenon. And he played a different game. He played the percentage game, but he played it to such a high level that he was more or less impossible to beat. As exciting that Alex Higgins was, with Steve Davis, you've seen this percentage contestant winner. And Higgins was exciting. So when Higgins won, you got all the crowd going. And, you know, Steve Davis will tell you himself, what made snooker go to such its high levels was the excitement of Alex Higgins. But as a winning situation, there was no one like the Nugget. So the Red Tops newspapers made it such a big rivalry, different personalities and different styles of play.
And it's weird now, isn't it? Because when you look at rivalries in all sports, it's usually they're rivalries because they're so close to each other. But when you look at the records between the two, they met 30 times. Davis won 25 of them. They met in 5 finals. Higgins won 1 of them. Davis won 6 world titles. Higgins, I say just the 2, but 2 of them. Why do we, when we look at these 2 names on a piece of paper, why do we think they were so close?
Well, I mean, the interesting matches, in a way, are the ones that Alex won. Because what you say, 25 out of 30 times, you know, Davis was the winner. That's what he did to most people, you know. But, I mean, I was at the conference centre in 1985, the year before I started playing in it, when Alex Higgins played Steve Davis. It was best of 9 then. It was 4-4. Higgins had a huge crowd in there watching him, and Steve was the man to beat. So everyone, maybe the neutrals, wanted Alex to win, and both players went out, came back in. They booed Steve, and there was no reason to boo Steve Davis. I mean, he's the nicest guy you'll ever meet in the world. But you know, Alex had a sort of a frenzied crowd there, and he went on to win the match 5-4. And there was a crowd invasion afterwards. The crowds got so involved in that game, you know, in the conference centre. It's unbelievable, to the point where my old friend, the tournament director, John Lazarus, he had an idea that he was going to put a decoy in the crowd because there was so much noise. And he said the first person who shouts out Alex's name, "Come on, Alex," is going to be thrown out. So they put someone in there in one of the rows, and he shouted out inside about 3 shots, and they sort of manhandled him out of the building, and it stopped anyone else from doing it. But you know, it was an amazing atmosphere in there. And you listen, I knew them both. And I had no favourites, but you couldn't help yourself but root for Alex in that match. He was the underdog, and the way he won and the way he played, you couldn't help it. I mean, Steve was pretty devastated to lose that match. He never really played very well at the Masters. Maybe that match left a mark on him, you know.
And Jimmy, what about your rivalry with Steve Davis? Of course, you met in the '84 final. It was the first ever final I watched. That's what made me fall in love with the game. Did you enjoy meeting him? If you saw the draw and you were at the top half and he was at the bottom, would you be thinking, I can meet Steve again in the final?
Neil would tell you, anybody in the 80s, Steve Davis was for me, the hardest player I ever played against. He had such a great temperament, such a great cue action. And his scoring ability, he was so consistent, did very few mistakes. And because I had the style like Alex Higgins, probably more even attacking than Higgins, I went for my shots. So then the newspapers had a sort of new rivalry because Steve Davis, as we've explained, carried on winning. So they had me in the red top newspapers against Steve Davis. They built a new rivalry up. And I quite liked it. I know... me and Steve Davis wasn't, I was sort of wasting my time partying. He was practicing. So I've got no, I never had any problems with Steve Davis. But you knew if you was playing Steve Davis, and Neil would tell you, even if you beat Steve Davis, you felt like you'd been in a war. He was that tough. So my rivalry with him lasted for about 5 or 6 years. And it was quite healthy for the game, I think.
I just want to ask, actually, Jim, while I'm speaking to you, everyone talks about your matches with Stephen Hendry, those 4 finals. We know all about those and the one with Parrott. But 84, maybe that was the year that the one that got away was the one final against Steve. The fact that you lost so close. No one really speaks about that final, do they?
No. And I'm glad you mentioned that because someone sent me something the other day. I was 17-16 down and... I potted a red and I didn't get on the pink and I played a very good safety shot and Steve Davis with his Rolls Royce like dead straight cue action rolled along Reading. I was 40 in front and he ended up winning the game on the green, so it could have easily been 17 each. But in that match, I'll never forget it, I was 12-4 down after the first 2 sessions and the late Jim Meadowcroft, who was a commentator, he used to put tips on for players. And I said, Jim, this tip's so hard. I'm really struggling with this. This is after the session. So we put a new tip on. And obviously you wouldn't be allowed to do this now. But in the Crucible, I was practicing on the actual match table at 12:30 at night. So good job the tournament director doesn't work there and get the sack. But I was practicing at 12:30 at night, knocking in this new tip. And I come out the next day. I won the first 3 frames very easily. And the 4th frame of the first session, I was 50 in front. And Steve Davis cleared up with 51 to win that game. So the first session, I ended up winning 3-1. But he had 2 doubles in that break. Not that I'm screaming, Neil. Right? And then the next session, I won 4-0. So I ended up coming out from 12-4 down. I ended up coming out 13-11. Maybe it'd have been 12 each. But the first session, it wasn't that easy in them days to just put a new tip on. It was a bit of an operation, as you know yourself. Yeah. And I think if I'd have had the equipment that I had today with super glue and all that to put a new tip on, maybe it'd have been different. But I agree with you. That definitely was one that got away for sure.
Another great rivalry. I'll start with you, Neil, because it probably won't be fair because it is about Jimmy White. It's his rivalry with Stephen Hendry. You touched on it ever so briefly just before. Would you say that's possibly the greatest rivalry ever in snooker?
Well, yes. I mean, I think the biggest myth about that, and I know I'm speaking with Jimmy here, the biggest myth about that is that Stephen never lost to Jimmy. Everyone thinks, it was all about Hendry. And, of course, those finals, we know what happened in those finals. And, I think Stephen probably was going to win 2 of those. There's 2 that Jimmy should have won. But Jimmy did beat him at the Crucible on 2 other occasions. That's the other thing. People forget that. I go back to Jimmy beat him 10-4 in '98. He beat him 13-12 in 1988, and he beat him in the Classic 10-4. That was at Bournemouth. That was at the end of a massively long run of wins that Stevie won 30 matches in a row. He beat him in the Masters in 2004. So everyone thinks, there was his nemesis man he couldn't beat. The fact is, the 4 World Finals, he didn't beat him, and we know that a couple of those he should have done. And I still think about that black he missed. I bet you Jimmy's thought about it a few times as well.
Jimmy, you had a good record against Hendry. Listen, we're talking about arguably, and we'll talk about this in another one of these, but we're talking about arguably the greatest snooker player of all time. Your record against him was you won 19, he won 36, which is pretty close out of the amount of times you played. And you beat him, of course, in the World Match Play Finals, or you hammered him in that 18-9. But you did lose in the 4 World Finals. Was there something different about meeting Hendry in a final compared to meeting Hendry in any other event at any other stage for you?
Well, it was because, as it went on and on, I was more desperate to win it. People were more desperate for me to win it. So it was always a slight edge for Stephen Hendry. And it was, it was massive. As Neil said, I definitely should have won 2 of them finals, but I'm still playing, so who knows?
The one in 1994, I don't want to mention it, but, Neil brought it up, so it's only fair that I push it home. The one where it went 18-17, you missed the black. What was that down to, that miss? Was it because you saw the winning post, or was it just one of those things?
No, just pressure. A golfer can sometimes. I did sort of throw my cue at it, looking bad at it. I did hit it quite quick. I think the pressure was building, but if you don't have the pressure in any sport, that's the buzz of playing. You tell me a soccer player that goes up to take a penalty and he's not, all his adrenaline is flowing, and it's how you handle it. And I was sort of, maybe I see the winning post, maybe when I was 14-8 up, I completely run out of steam in that match. He won 2 or 3 games. I tried to force the issue. But that black I missed, it was a twitch. It was what people do. You don't line it up right. You're under pressure. You don't regroup. And I missed it. If you don't, I think myself, if you don't have that in sport, what's the point in playing?
Yeah. Out of the 2, Davis and Hendry, who do you hate the most? I'm only joking.
Why would I hate? I don't hate anybody, Andy.
I know. Right, we're going to have a quick break. And, of course, when we come back, the snooker rivalry chat continues, including the rivalry between Ronnie O'Sullivan and Mark Selby. We'll see you right after this. And a more welcome back to Snooker Vodcast with me, Andy Goldstein, the whirlwind of London Town, Jimmy White, and Neil Folds. On this podcast, we're talking about snooker rivalry. Before the break, we're talking about Hendry, we're talking about Jimmy, we're talking about Davis and Alex Higgins. We're going to move on now, guys, to the rivalry between 2 players still playing the game professionally, and they're playing it incredibly well. It's Mark Selby and Ronnie O'Sullivan. Neil, the rivalry between these 2, we talked before about contrasting styles between maybe Higgins and Davis. Do you see something similar in these 2?
Well, there's definitely a contrast between these 2 guys. Interestingly, Ronnie doesn't think of it as a rivalry between him and Mark Selby. Why he says that, I don't know. But, when you look at what the damage, if you like, one has done to the other early on in his career, Ronnie had the edge over Selby. There's no question that, O'Sullivan was beating Selby at the start. Of course, the big match that makes it a rivalry is that World Championship. When in 2014, where Mark Selby came and beat Ronnie, Ronnie's never been to the one table setup at the Crucible since. He's always lost it before that stage. So that would have hurt him, and that's what started Selby on this, 3 world titles, and he won everything else. So that was the groundbreaking match between them. And since then, they've beaten each other a few times. So the rivalry is still going. And I've got unfinished. How many more chapters in that rivalry are there? That's the interesting thing, because it's still ongoing.
And Jimmy, I'll tell you another interesting thing. They've met 28 times so far today, and at the moment it's O'Sullivan that leads 18-10. But in finals, they've met 8 times, and it's Selby that leads 5-3. What does that tell you about the 2 of them?
I think the rivalry is a little bit similar to the contrast styles. Ronnie O'Sullivan is more like a Hendry style player, and Mark Selby is more like a Steve Davis. A bit more percentage. And with Ronnie O'Sullivan, he wants to win the game in one visit. And Mark Selby, if he finds that he's got enough of a lead and a colours safe, he will tie the game up. So I think that's the thing. And it's healthy to have a little bit of a rivalry. I don't think it's as big as the one with Steve Davis and Alex Higgins, or me and Steve Davis. We did forget one, actually. We forgot one with Stephen Hendry had with Steve Davis, because obviously Steve Davis being the most consistent winner, and then Stephen Hendry coming along and sort of knocking him off that took that crown from him. But I'd say the modern day, that's the only rivalry, but it's not as big as it was before.
Okay. And Neil, of course, one of the reasons Ronnie's been around so long is because he's got so many different rivals, not just Mark Selby, but also someone that turned pro, also part of the class of 92. John Higgins. They've met in 17 finals. Ronnie at the moment leading 7-10. It's 29-37 in meetings between the two overall. I mean, when you're talking about great rivalries in snooker, for so many reasons, probably the first one being they turned pro at exactly the same time, contrasting styles as well. I mean, we're blessed with these two in the game, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, that is the modern day rivalry, I think, those two, no question. I mean, I still think back to that 2006 Masters final, the last ever played at the Conference Centre, where O'Sullivan, well, he was a long way in front of the decider, he's 60 in front. John Higgins rolled a red to the middle, which only just dropped, and he cleared up, won the final. And Ronnie has said since then that was the biggest disappointment in his career. And it's a long time ago, but matches like that stick in your mind. And there have been so many great matches, between them. And, it's amazing how they're both still going so well. I mean, people don't think John's the same player he was. He's been in the last 3 world finals, so he's not doing badly. Ronnie has not won it for a long time. But when they meet, it kind of feels like a very special occasion, even though they've met all the times, as you pointed out.
Yeah, it does feel like a very special occasion, Jimmy. And it's interesting when you talk to Ronnie about his rivals in the game, he always puts John Higgins at the very top of that list, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Besides himself, that he never praises himself, O'Sullivan. He thinks that John Higgins is the greatest player in the world. And, he definitely is one of them, because John Higgins is like Steve Davis. He plays the right shot all the time. And, under pressure, there's no one better than him. And his rivalry, he doesn't care playing Ronnie O'Sullivan, because sometimes Ronnie doesn't give it 100%. And you can tell that in his game sometime. And Higgins is always waiting to pick up on that, because Higgins, make no mistake, every time he goes out to do battle, he gives it 100%. So I think the rivalry with them, we are very lucky, because on one hand, you've got Ronnie O'Sullivan on top form, is unplayable. And then the other hand, you've got John Higgins, who is a great modern day scorer, but also a great percentage player as well.
And if we're talking about rivalries, we should talk about two players that in another podcast, we're going to talk about the game's greatest ever player. You have to talk about Stephen Hendry, obviously, in that conversation. We've talked about Stephen so far in this podcast. You've got to talk about his rivalry, Neil, with Ronnie O'Sullivan. 13 finals. It probably surprises people that Ronnie won 9 of them. Would you say there was maybe a 3 or 4 or even 5-year period where they were both at the top of their game playing each other, and we saw the best of both players?
Yeah, and the other thing is the amount of people, because it's safe to say they're probably 2 of the greatest players, to have played the game. And people want to say, well, who would have won on both at their very best? It's a very difficult question to answer that, because of how good they were. I mean, the strange thing about those two is that when Hendry was at the top of his game, Ronnie beat him as a 17-year-old in the UK Championship final, which takes some believing when you think about it. And I still remember the handshake and the look that Stephen Hendry gave Ronnie O'Sullivan. He was congratulating him, but he looked at him as if to say, well, what is this bloke? How can you do that to me? No one had done that to him. Don't get me wrong, after that, it went the other way. And, of course, Stephen beat Ronnie a lot of times. But that was a great rivalry. They were definitely from different generations. But this is for another day, but Stephen might have retired a little bit too soon. But at least he went out while he was still a leading player.
And Jimmy, I'll tell you what is interesting. We've been talking about rivalries, of course, since we started this chat. And the one thing that seems to be sticking out like a sore thumb is the fact that you always have contrasting styles between the two players. Although we don't have that with Judd Trump and Ronnie O'Sullivan. They obviously have a rivalry. They've met 26 times, and it's beautifully poised at 13 apiece. Although in finals, it's 7-3 to Trump. We talk about the passing of the baton. I know the same age gap. It's a great stat. I heard it from you, actually, for the first time, Jimmy. The gap in years between you and Higgins is the same as you and O'Sullivan, and then O'Sullivan and Trump, it's the same. Do you think that when Ronnie watches Judd Trump, do you think maybe there's a part of Ronnie that thinks, I might be handing the baton over now? Or has that already happened, or maybe not for a couple of years?
Well, I think in the last 2 years, we've seen Trump completely turn into a different player, maybe 3 years, and we put it down to many things. His brother, his practice. He's always sort of, his manager, Django, they've had a good setup. They have good practice facilities in the Grove. So Trump, we was always waiting for Trump, especially Neil. Neil was his biggest fan. He was always waiting to say, why is Trump not coming through? And, that was always the big question. All of a sudden now Trump has come through. And when he's playing O'Sullivan in finals, for some reason, he seems to, he won 10-9, I think, in somewhere in Europe a couple of years ago, and I think that sort of set Trump up. And he has beaten Ronnie in a lot of finals, and it's a great rivalry to have. You know, we're going to see two of the most exciting players that the game's ever seen going to carry on being rivals. You know, and as Trump says, though, he's still learning off of Ronnie O'Sullivan, and I think with Ronnie O'Sullivan not playing as much as he does, and not playing as many tournaments, if he wants to keep up that rivalry and beat Trump, I think he has to go back to playing in most of the tournaments and practicing harder, because Trump has definitely got the upper hand at the moment.
Well, listen, we're nearly out of time. Before we wrap things up, I'm going to come back to you finally, Neil. Out of all the rivalries we've spoken about, and maybe we've missed out a few, what's your favourite one in snooker? What do you think has done the most for the sport?
Listen, they're all great, and I'm looking forward to the next development with O'Sullivan and Trump. I still remember that 7-1 up session that Trump against Ronnie in 2019 in the Masters. I think that almost made Judd Trump a better player. But I want to go back, because I'm like Jimmy. We go back a bit in snooker, and I still think the Davis, Alex Higgins, Steve Davis, Alex Higgins rivalry is the best. And I think it really did divide the nation. It literally did, because if you loved Alex Higgins, you would want him to beat, of all people, Steve. And if you didn't really like Alex, or you loved Steve, you really wanted to see that go the other way. So that was what people watched snooker for. And I think a lot of the snooker boom in the 80s is down to those two. Okay,
Jimmy, same question to you. And I'm more than happy for you to include yourself in the answer.
No, I absolutely 100% agree with Neil Foltz. I think, don't forget we only had 4 channels in them days, and snooker was at its most popular. And I think that rivalry between Steve Davis and Alex Higgins being so flamboyant and such a cavalier sort of style of play, Davis being, very professional, a very percentage player, but also phenomenally good. I think that rivalry made the game of snooker, set it on the route that it's got to today.
Okay, well, listen, lads, that's all we've got time for, mainly because Jimmy's got to make a souffle and Neil's due on the hockey in about 5 minutes' time. But I've enjoyed it. It's been a good chat. And listen, there's loads more of these podcasts about, so just Google it and find them. They're on iTunes, they're on Eurosport, all over the place. So make sure you check them out. But for the time being, from myself, from Neil Foltz, bye, Neil Foltz. There you go.
Cheers.
From the whirlwind as well. See you, Jimmy. See you soon.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye for now.